Well, there were protests around the country. There were a lot of marches, a lot of peaceful ones in the effort to end racial injustice. And Dan Quinn, the coach of the Falcons, joined with Thomas Dimitroff, the GM of the Falcons, and others in the organization, players, assistant coaches. It was a Buckhead for Black Lives organized march, and the Falcons put it on their social media site there. And their head coach, Dan Quinn, joins us here. Dan, what was it like to be a part of that with a lot of people from your organization as well?
Well, Mike, number one, it's good to see you, and I would say it was really inspiring because the so many diverse people were there, and who now are no longer accepting things that they thought they couldn't change, but instead now are saying, "I'm going to be a part of that change, and I'm no longer willing to accept things." So it was my first time, in a protest or a march, but it certainly won't be my last.
Every coach does a really good job of trying to rally their troops with their own personality. But we've had a lot of reasons, whether they were covering games or being around you guys, to see how you've tried to build a brotherhood, an organization, a togetherness within your team. So you've been kind of ground level with your team, with your team's players over the last few years. I'm curious if all of this really surprised you as much as I think it surprised a lot of the country, how painful that this has been for so many players in the National Football League.
Well, I think as coaches and oftentimes as leaders, Mike, when something's wrong, you just want to go fix it and you want to be involved. And so what we learned, and even from last Sunday night, getting on a call with 15 guys, I think what we really found was how incredibly important listening is. And so people were really hurting under the surface. And so knowing that, it wasn't into the, hey, what can we do? Let's, take action right away. It was, man, I'm mad, I'm pissed, I'm angry, and I want to talk about it. And so the first part of the week was that, and we couldn't have been more impressed, Mike, with our mayor here, Keisha Bottoms, and the leadership she provided for our city. And I actually asked her to come on and speak with the team. I was so impressed. And so moments like that to listen, I thought were the biggest lesson in terms of, now we can take some action for the change.
Yeah, we saw everything that was going on in Atlanta, and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms' speech, her impromptu 4-minute speech as the violence was going on right there in the heart of town, the CNN Center, College Football Hall of Fame, was so from the heart. As a mom of African-American young boys,
Yep.
It was really powerful. And I'm sure that her message resonated even more because your players saw that. Hey, I want to ask you about your quarterback. This is a sport. It's a league. It's an entertainment world that, QB1, as they're referred to, when they step up, people listen more. And with his words and actions and a $500,000 donation to a GoFundMe, Matt Ryan really spoke up. What did that mean to the rest of the guys who are part of this Atlanta Falcons organization?
Well, I think a few years ago, maybe in 2018, Mike, we as a team had spoken about, I wish, the world could see our locker room. And I think anybody who's been in team sports recognizes that space and how special it is and the connections are there. But I think what we recognized also is not all players and not all people have the same experiences when we leave the locker room, and that's not okay. And so I think Matt recognized that as well, and we both, had discussed it to say, hey, I support, or it sounds hollow, and we wanted to make sure we could do more. And so having those moments where we could listen and having the moments where we could even connect further as a team, Mike, those were impactful. And I think there'll be more examples of this moving forward.
Matt's certainly been a leader for everybody within that organization. I think we're seeing the value of that right now. I'm glad, because I've enjoyed covering you. I'm glad I'm still talking to you as the head coach of the Falcons. It didn't look that way halfway through the season. And somehow you guys came out the back end of that with a football team that wouldn't die, wouldn't quit, finished 7-9, finished really strong at the end of last year. What was it that kept everybody together, Dan?
Well, I hope maybe we can tie some of that together now, Mike. And one of the things I've spoken, to the team about was good performance and unity are inseparable. And we weren't as connected as we needed to be in the first half of the season. And we did find that connection that you need to play winning football in the second half. So let's make sure we never lose sight of that and connect to that, because although the very best teams, you've got to be really strong in the locker room first. And so, to me, that's the number one lesson that I took off is that the performances and the unity, they go hand in hand.
6-2 the last 8, winning the last 4 games. The Falcons ended up 7-9, and this year that may get you knocking on the edge of a wild card. The way the playoffs will change, adding another team. Somebody gets hot at the end of the year. Watch out; it could be a very different feel. So the plans are in place here. Get you guys back in the facility. Start bringing players back. I read through the protocols 2 nights ago, and there's a lot of stuff for people in the organization to do. How realistic that teams are going to be able to pull this off from your seat, in your estimation?
Well, I think having moments like now, the staff's back here in the building, Mike, and going through some of those protocols and learning how to work together in a new way. If we wrote down all the things that we used to do 3 months ago and what we do now, I don't think those 2 lists would match. And so now, how can we be the first space to go through it prior to players? We know they won't come back until training camp, but finding the guidelines, finding that flow that'll take place. Think of meeting rooms and inside the building things, not out on the practice field for how we normally interact, but the physical distancing that could take place in meeting rooms, locker rooms, inside the building. But I've got a lot of faith and hope that we'll get it done, and come fall be a big part of our country coming back together in so many ways.
So it's been virtual for so many different things, including, as you said, talking with your players and meeting with your players. And that may take away the individuality of growth in the offseason, because there's a plan and a program for each player. It's not just one size fits all. How have you guys been able to bridge that gap to get specific, here's what we need to do for you, through a video screen?
Well, I think 2 things, Mike. You talked about the connection. I think the digital world can make it challenging because our game, so much of it requires us to be present with one another. It's the on-field training. It's the work that you do together. It's the execution, of a play that goes together and the practice for that. So the way we went about it is say, okay, how could we customize different programs for the entire team? In other words, if Mike, you were playing, okay, this is the one thing, Mike, we'd like you to improve on. Here's how we want to go attack it. Here's how we're going to measure it. And so we made it almost a off-season customized by player. And we thought if we got better, separately, when we do get our team collectively back together in practice to execute, that would make a big difference. And fortunately for us in Atlanta, we do have a lot of players that live locally, and there had to be some player coaching going on. We talked about that as this started, and I'm really proud of the group for what they've accomplished so far together without the coaches. And that's been a big piece with leaders, like you said, with Matt, who definitely, know how to lead the way, know what we need to get done, and are pushing to do that.
Finally got Todd Gurley down there for the physical, and that's all set. That's a big addition to your team. A couple of good defensive additions with 2 top 50 picks in the draft. How different do you think this team might look on the field from what we saw at the end of a hot season last year?
Well, I think the identity piece, Mike, that comes, to mind of what you want your team to play like. And so we don't get to really show that identity until we get into the games. But we want to be really clear about the style and attitude that we want to play, running the ball and play pass and explosive offensively, defensively, our ability to create more takeaways. That's certainly at the forefront of it, and adding players to that mix will be a big piece. So the identity piece for us is a big one. We know a big part of that comes from our connection. And through COVID, through the last 2 weeks of some really raw and meaningful conversations, I would say the development piece has happened, and the connection, even though we're not together, that's also happened.
Some talk of maybe 2 preseason games. There's been so many things floated out there. We don't know what anything's going to look like, but that's the conversation of the week. How would that impact what you try to do as a head coach?
Well, I think you're right. We're turning into like a rapid response team to make sure when the moment comes, you're ready to adjust. And so it seems like a long way off. So much has changed over the last 2 months, that 2 months from now, I would expect more change, to take place, and we'll adjust as needed. If it does go into that space where it's 2, we know we're heading that way in the future. And so maybe this gives us a glimpse of that. I think from a coaching side, the games are one, Mike, but you also want to know, okay, what's our lead up for practice time? Is it 2 games with the same lead up that you would had if you had 4, or is there more practice time moving forward? So as a coach, that's where my head goes to right away. Whatever the guidelines are, we just adjust it where they're at. But that would be one thing I'd like to know, where we still get the on-field time together, because we haven't seen the rookies as well. I was looking outside at the practice field because I am finally back in my office, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's like there's a practice field out there just waiting. The grass is in perfect shape, I promise. When we spoke to Sean McDermott, he was sitting down, and he had a nice framed picture of his William & Mary days over his shoulder. And we talked about how Mike Tomlin were there, and you were a GA, a grad assistant. And he said, you were different. The grad assistants would come through, but he always felt that you were different. You could see head coach quality. Did you see something different in Sean and Mike? Maybe not NFL head coach, but did you see some stick out qualities of them when you were there?
Yeah, and they were a couple of years apart. So Mike, I saw it instantly. Right. Leader of the team, incredibly connected to the whole group. And so I can remember, hey, we're going through a fraternity party. Okay, I'm right there with him. I was only a year behind him. I just gotten out of college myself. So we had gotten connected, and I knew that he wanted to coach. And so we actually coached our first, that next year I went to VMI, and we were in a staff meeting, and somebody asked about Bill Stewart, who was the coach, asked about a receiver coach. And I brought up Mike's name, and he said, the receiver from William & Mary? And I said, yeah, that's the one. And so I think Mike came up for the interview and then was coaching spring ball by like 3:00 that afternoon. So he started in the morning, and like Stu wasn't letting him go home. It was like, yeah, you're hired. Here's what's your size, So, and with Sean, what came about so strongly for him, he was a relentless competitor, just in everything he did. He's a sophomore safety, but you felt his presence, you felt his intent, you felt his connection, and so we saw that in him then, and then, man, did it take off once he from Philadelphia to Carolina and on. So we still keep up, the 3 of us, and always enjoy spending time together, whether it's at a league meeting or, playing ball games. But 2 guys that I think the world of.
It's so cool. 1/10 essentially of the league's head coaches all together at William & Mary at the same time. It's such a neat story. Glad things worked out. Glad that you get another shot at it here with the Falcons, and have a good team that you guys have put together here with you and Thomas Dimitroff and company in this offseason. Dan, thanks for the time. Stay healthy, and we look forward to hopefully running into you during the season.
Yeah, no doubt, Mike. I look forward to it, and always enjoy spending time with you too, man.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.